It's so good to have Lundroid back. Thanks everyone for coming down. It's amazing to have so many Android developers at our office. So today we're going to be talking about why you should run A/B tests in your Android app. So we're going to talk about some of the A/B tests that we've run, ones that we found or we thought were particularly surprising. Some of the things that we've learned from those A/B tests, and some best practices. So if you want to start doing your own A/B tests, these are things that you can use. So maybe you've heard of Deliveroo, but in case, we're a marketplace that connects customers who want to order food or groceries with restaurants and supermarkets and the network of riders that deliver those. We're available around the world, and we have 3 Android apps. But the thing that I think is most interesting for today's talk is that, we run about 200 experiments each year in our apps. So my name is Edward Harker. I'm an Android engineer here, and I'm going to be speaking with Connie and Jamie. Cool. So a quick question before we start. So who is using A/B tests in your apps today? Okay, quite a few people. Nice. So I'm going to start with an example. So here we have the sign-in screen in our app. And you can see that the user is able to sign in with Facebook, sign in with Google, or they can use their email address. And what do we want to do here? We want to try and increase the amount of people that are signing into the app. And what we know is that if the user has more friction, they're less likely to complete what they're trying to do. So in this case, if the user signs in with social media, it's just a couple of taps and they can sign in. Whereas if they use their email address, right, they have to type out their email address, type their password, maybe they make a mistake, or they have to go to their password manager. And all of these are kind of places where the user might kind of drop out and not end up signing up. So we have this idea, okay? What if we make the sign in with email button less prominent? We can guide users towards signing in with social media, where we know that they're more likely to sign in. But this is kind of our assumption, right? How can we actually know that this is the case if we were to ship this? So we could just ship it, and we look at how many users are signing in after we've shipped it. But what happens if we do a marketing campaign at the same time? Users might be signing in because of that campaign, right? How can we isolate just this change? So we can run an A/B test. But what is an A/B test? So for those that don't know, it's a way that we can compare multiple versions of the same feature against each other. So we would have both versions of our feature live to, say, 50% of users, and then we're able to compare which version of that feature achieves the result that we want. So in the example of running a marketing campaign, we would be able to isolate just the change to our button. So we're comparing apples to apples. Then after a few weeks, we would analyze the results, check our metrics, and see which variant is going to have the best result. So back to our example with the sign-up screen. We have our control variant on the left and the variant on the right. So 50% of our users would see each screen, and then we would be able to analyze the results and see which variant has the most sign-ups. So, question. Who thinks that users who saw the variant signed up more? Who thinks that people who saw the solid button color signed up more? Okay, cool, maybe like 50-50. So, yeah, people who saw the button without the color signed up more. So we've been able to validate our assumptions and our hypothesis that guiding users towards social sign-in results in better signups. And I think the thing that I really want to highlight here is that, you know, such a small change in our app can have a big impact. And that, you know, we can't just build a screen, ship it, and forget about it. We can continue to iterate on that screen and really get the most value out of it. And we can really measure that by using A/B tests. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Another question. Who cares about state restoration? Okay, maybe that's a clue for later. Okay, so let's have a little story. So I'm using the app and you know, added a few items to my basket, you know, doing some shopping. But then I get a text message from a friend, and he says, hey, check out this cute cat video. So of course, I go and watch the video. And you know, one thing leads to another, and I spend the next hour binge watching cat videos. But then my stomach starts to rumble, and I remember, oh yeah, okay, I was trying to order some food, so I should go back to Deliveroo. Oh. I did have some items in my basket, but now they're gone. So what's happened here? Well, if you didn't guess, yeah, the app was killed by the system while it was in the background, and we didn't restore their basket. So what did we do about this? First, we check customer feedback. So, you know, users leave reviews on the Play Store, and you know, we look at that and we can see, okay, there's some reviews that look a bit fishy. Maybe they relate to this. But, you know, devices these days, right, are so powerful. They have gigabytes of RAM. Surely our app can't be killed so often. So we measured how big of an issue this actually is. So we add some, you know, monitoring into our app, and we're able to see how often this is happening. And we realize it's actually an issue that we should think about. So what did we do about it? We decided to save the contents of the user's basket to the disk. So this means that if the app gets killed while it's in the background, we can, you know, when they reopen the app, we can restore that by reading it from the disk. So this is what we did. We saved the user's basket so that they don't lose it if the app gets killed in the background. So after making this change, what do you think? Did people order more food or less food, or the same amount of food? So more food? Less food? The same? Okay, people ordered more food. So obviously, state restoration matters. Yeah, and I think it kind of highlights, right, like how much of an issue this can be, right? And it's easy to think that, like, devices are so powerful, right? I can just stick this in a singleton and, you know, forget about it. But, you know, actually handling the Android lifecycle properly does impact the bottom line. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to hand over to Jamie now, who's got some really exciting experiments to talk about on the home screen.
Great. Hey, everybody. My name's Jamie. I'm an Android dev on the consumer app as well. I work mainly on the home screen, so I'm going to take you through a few experiments we ran in our home space. So this is our splash screen. Let's go for a loop, thank you. So we need to do some very, very important work when the user opens the app. So we have a splash screen. The first thing we need to do is fetch the user's location. This is very important to the rest of our user funnel. We need to know where you are if you want to order food to you, so we need to fetch your location. And the second important thing we do is fetch your feature flag values. And this dictates what features enabled for a given user, but also which experiments they're a part of and which experiments buckets they're in. So two very, very important pieces of work that we need to know as early as possible. So we do them currently in the splash screen. But to hide all that work, we actually have a very pretty animation that one of the designers brought up that's been in the app for a few years now to hide all that work we're doing to start with. So if we visualize that in this sort of like Gantt chart style diagram, it's something like this. In this example, the initialization work we're talking about actually took longer than the animation. So in this case, we get to the animation, show a little load and spinner while we're doing some work still, and then whenever we can and the work is finished, we move on to the home screen. We can start loading the home feed. But actually, this is kind of a best case scenario for us in terms of efficiency, because we could have something like this, where our initialization work, maybe a location was super quick, and we complete that initialization very, very quickly. But we have our animation we have to play. And prior to the experiment I had to show you, we actually were running the animation the full length, waiting for it to finish before moving to home. So we end up with it's like big dead air gap where we're not doing anything useful. We're just sitting there looking at this pre-animation, but not doing anything worthwhile. So the obvious solution here would just be to cut the animation short whenever we're done working, move on to the home screen. We did play with that, but the jank you get when opening a new activity, when you do that mid-animation, it just wasn't working for us, so we explored some other options. So one of the things we came up with was like, what if we just preload the home feed? So in cases where this initialization work was short enough, we decided, we'll just load the home feed while we're still in the splash screen, while the animation is still playing. And as soon as we get onto the home screen, we had it there, we don't have to load it. So if I compare those two there, it takes here forever for the user to see home. But when we're preloading, that time's interactive, that time it takes for when a user opens our app to when they see the home feed is much, much shorter. So much the fact that actually, on average, end up being like a net 30% improvement, which is a huge, huge chunk of our TTI, which is great. So we ran as an experiment. So what do we think happened? So we improved TTI. Hands up if you think that meant people ordered more food. Hands up if you think that people ordered less food. And how about no change? Hands for no change? Nice, okay, cool. It wasn't a trick question. People did order more food. But I think the surprising here is that orders went up a lot. A lot of us don't really think about our splash screens. We can't just put changes in or whatever. And, whenever we get to our home feed is whenever. But yeah, orders went up a lot here. So what learnings we take away from this? The obvious one is that time to interactive matters. You might add a change to your startup time that adds 100 milliseconds, and you might think, it's only 100 ms, what difference can it make? It makes a huge difference, I'm telling you here. And I think one of the most interesting things is actually this is one of our most successful experiences of 2021. This is not, it wasn't a huge redesign of a feature, it wasn't a whole new feature we built, took 3 months to build and shipped. We improved the TTI, and it was one of our most successful changes of 2021, which is mental. But another key point here is that when running experiments, you only want to build as much as you need to be able to run it. So this experiment in particular actually only ran on iOS. That was, we scoped the work out on Android. It was going to be a bit tricky with iOS's Splash setup. So iOS is fairly easy, and our data science folks were happy that we had a sample size that was big enough and representative enough to just do this on iOS and get the sort of data we needed. That's what we did. There's also a balance to find of you need to be confident the feature works when you ship it. No one likes to have to hotfix anything, and no one likes, have to restart an experiment because there's a bug halfway through that validates all your results. So you need to do enough work to be confident your feature works. Maybe those comprehensive UI tests could be wait until later because you don't want to build the whole thing and then it comes back negative and you've got to roll it all back. Great, and that leads me on nicely to my second experiment, one we did on the Android 12 Splash. So Android 12 introduced a new system splash screen when you open your app. So anytime you open your app, until you draw your first frame, you get a nice splash from the system that shows your app icon. But we already had a splash screen. So we end up with this weird like double splash effect. So if you look closely, you've got the Android 12 splash with the static root, then we go into our existing splash screen, and it's like a weird double effect. It's not very nice. So actually even worse for our Plus customers, Plus our like subscription customers, where you got this, the teal color from the Android 12 splash, then we go into our like exclusive animation for Plus customers, and it kind of, again, even more janky where it goes teal to purple. It's not very nice at all. So this happened about the same time we got the results back for the previous experiment. We showed that like improving TTI means more orders. So we had an idea. We need to adopt this new Android 12 splash convention anyway, which means we need to bring a sort of a new animation in. And we saw this preloading experiment. We're like, well, that preloading work is still going to be quite tricky. So what if we adopt the new Android 12 splash format, bring in a new animation that's shorter, and then therefore we still improve TTI without doing all the work, and hopefully that means more orders. So again, visualize this is the example before. This is the huge gap we had with the old animation that was far too long. And with this huge gap, it doesn't really work. The only real change we're making is that we're making the animation shorter. So we haven't really addressed the core of the problem, but we've improved the worst case scenario. So I've got the comparison side by side here. I promised these were in sync when I added them to the slides, but Google decides it's its own thing. So on the left is the old one. You've got the static root when it comes around. Static root into animation, and then this one actually is the new one where it sort of like seamlessly combines them. So the net effect here actually was still a TTI improvement, only about 10%, not quite as big as a 30% from before, but still a huge improvement. So great. We also fixed the weird double splash effects. We have one homogeneous splash screen that works with the Android 12 standards. But one change we did make is we removed the plus animation. We couldn't quite get it to work with designers where we transitioned from the teal from Android 12 into the purple for Plus users. So like, well, to get everyone on the same splash screen, so it's one like nice gentle effect as you come into the ad. Great. So we ran an experiment on this just to validate, make sure we were, didn't do any drastic damage. So yeah, a TTI improvement still. We fixed the weird splash, effect, but we did remove the plus animation. So hands up if you think that made orders went up. Hands up if you think orders went down. Hands up if no change. Okay, cool. So I will say that we almost didn't run this experiment. We already had the precedence, right, that improving TTI means more people order food. So we made this change here. It's like, well, we're making a TTI improvement. It's the same thing. Is there really need to run this experiment? It's like, well, we have changed the plus animations. We better double check. But this was my first experiment that I championed at Deliveroo. I was super excited. I was like, it's an absolute open goal of experiment. We already proved TTI makes a huge difference in our orders. I was already planning, what I was going to bring up my performance review. I said, look at this experiment I ran, and look how successful it was. Look how much orders went up by. What happened? Orders went down. And when I say they went down, they went quite a way down. It's actually we had one of our best experiments of 2021 with the iOS preloading experiment. This is actually one of our worst performing experiments of 2021, which is a grand old shame. But actually, in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense. We looked into numbers. So we found that our Plus users were ordering less often because we removed their Plus animation. So when they tend to be our high frequency customers, so you affect their order rate, it has a bigger effect on our numbers, which is a real shame. So what do we learn from this one? Well, again, users do care about splash screens. Again, whether it's conscious or subconscious, difficult to tell, but users do care about the splash screens. You do need to be careful of the changes you're making. We moved the Plus animation for Plus users, and they ordered less. Yes, again, this is one of our worst experiments of 2021, which is such a surprise to us. Everyone involved was like, absolutely, it's going to be successful. No chance orders go down, and they did. But negative results not necessarily bad. So it's not often that you can say, we have an exact monetary value on our splash screen. That's not a usual thing you have when you're building apps. So you actually, even though we had a negative result, we had to roll it back and rethink it. We actually learned a lot from it. This is also the best example that we can give you about challenging your assumptions. We had precedents that TTI improved, made orders go up. So there was no reason to think that orders might go down for this one. So had we not run this as an experiment, we would have shipped it and we had a negative impact on our product without knowing about it at all. So it's very, very important to run experiments, even if you're very, very confident in their success, to make sure that you're doing the right thing. So we're going to ship this experiment in. So the final point here is that actually knowing the impact of your work is very, very engaging. So being able to like point to like material impacts that you've made onto a product is great. There's so many changes that we make as mobile devs that like you kind of like know it's good, but like have no real knowledge of how much impact it actually has on users. So it's really, really nice to be able to quantify that, especially when it gets around to performance review season and you go, oh, look, I was part of all these projects and look how the material impact it had on the business. So sometimes they go down as wins, sometimes they go down as learning experiences. Great. Thank you, everyone. I'll hand over to Connie to talk more about our Plus experiments.
Cool. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Connie and I work as an Android dev here at Deliveroo, and I work at the Plus team specifically. So today I'm going to talk to you about 2 experiments that we ran in the Plus team. So the first one is allowing users to easily switch between Plus subscription tiers. So first you might wonder, what is Deliveroo Plus? Well, say that, it's Friday night and I'm feeling like having some Dijon. So I add some food and I go to my basket. But there is a bit of a problem here. It says there is a delivery fee of $3.99 and I don't want to pay that. Luckily, there is a button there that says get it free. So I click on it. And it turns out there is something called Deliveroo Plus, which means that for a monthly fee, you get unlimited free delivery over a certain order threshold. This sounds amazing. So I go on to that. So I've got to pick between 2 different tiers of subscriptions. So we've got the gold one, which is $7.99, and I've got to spend about £10 to get the free delivery. Or I can choose silver, which is $3.49 a month, but I have to spend about £25. Well, my order was about £16, so I'm thinking, you know what, I'm just going to go with gold and get that free delivery. So I sign up, and there we go. I've got unlimited free delivery. I go back into my basket, and I look at the delivery fee, and it's now free. And also, it says I even saved $3.99 with Plus. Amazing. But time goes on. And I've become quite addicted to Dijon. And I seem to be ordering more and more at the same time. So what I want to do actually is I want to look at that silver subscription, because I'm also feeling like I have a lot of subscriptions every month and, it was a little bit cheaper and I add so many naan breads anyway every time. So I think, actually, that's probably a better tier for me. But I go back to the account screen and I can't find that silver tier anywhere. I go on web, I can't find it there either. And finally, I decide to call up the care team at Deliveroo. And they say that, well, if you want to switch on to silver, you have to actually cancel your gold subscription, wait for that subscription cycle to finish, and then sign up to the silver plan. Well, this sounds like a lot of effort. And what we were talking about here and what we were thinking within the Plus team was that actually, if we could just allow customers to easily switch between subscription tiers, then maybe a lot of people will sign up to silver instead if they're trying to save a bit of money. Or we just, lose less customers to Plus because we just make it easier to switch. So we introduced a feature to allow users to easily switch between subscription tiers. So you can kind of see here how you go on your Plus screen, you click on Switch Plans, you select Silver, switch to Silver Plan, and it takes about 2 seconds unless you read all the terms and conditions, but no one does. So, great. Let's go on to the hypothesis. So our hypothesis was that if we give users the ability to switch plans, that should decrease cancellations, which means we should be able to retain users on Plus for longer. So this is where we had our control, where you can see you didn't see anything, no option to switch plans. And then we had our variant, which takes you through that whole journey that I just showed. So what do we think? Did Plus retention increase or decrease as a result of introducing the feature to switch plans? So if you think that Plus retention increased, put your hands up. Okay. Decreased? No change? Oh, well, that's it. Okay, so not a trick question. The plus retention did increase. But what we did find really interesting with this experiment is that most users actually switched from silver to gold. So we kind of thought of this as like, oh, you know, people want to save a bit of money, they're going to switch to silver rather than cancelling. But actually, it turns out everyone just wants to be on a gold subscription. And people care a lot about that delivery free threshold. So that was great for us. So what are the learnings here? Well, I think, you know, an experiment can provide a lot of unexpected results on other tracked metrics. And that's super useful for customer insight, but also building future experiments. So a lot of the time when we build experiments, we have some core metrics that we look at, or maybe even one core metric that we want to influence. But what's really insightful is that you always get all this other information about your customers that you didn't necessarily know. And that can be used for loads of other experiments and just understanding your customers better in general. And also, our attitude with this experiment was a little bit of a, you know, regardless, even if it's flat, you know, we're solving a customer problem here, and that's always going to be a big win. So we wanted to experiment on it to verify our hypothesis. But we thought, you know what, people calling the care team and asking to switch here is just a problem we should solve in the app anyway. Okay, this is the last one. Don't you worry. So, experiment number 6, showing a Plus subscription pop-up. So who in this room loves a good pop-up? Put your hands up more. There we go. Anyone else? Don't we just love the pop-ups? Well, we don't. So, me, Jamie, and Ed had a bit of a chat about pop-ups and how we felt about them. And we felt that in a lot of the apps we use, they can just show a little bit too often. They show the same information, and if they're irrelevant or they're too frequent, they can feel quite intrusive, and they do interfere with the app experience. You know, they just tend to like block the whole screen, interfere with the user journey. Our developer perspective was also not super positive, because we felt that throughout our careers, you know, working with pop-ups, dialogues, banners, they can be a little bit tricky because sometimes you've got, you know, something that's sort of powered or you get from the back end, but you also want to keep some logic on the front end, like how many times the user has interacted with the pop-up. And sometimes you have these third-party tools, so you're driving up messages, they can be difficult to test, or you have your internal tool. And overall, we just felt like, you know, they are just quite difficult to test sometimes. And they can be hard to make accessible. So for example, for someone using a screen reader, and you sort of navigate through the content on the screen, and then suddenly there is a load of other content that's not really, you know, that relevant. It can be quite hard to make them accessible. Also, we already have to handle dialogues, right? Like permissions and location permission and stuff like that, and errors. So that it can also result in overlap sometimes. So from a developer perspective, we just find that can be a little bit painful. So on Plus, we have something called the Plus pop-up experiment. So we had a number of promotional pop-ups on the basket screen. So you can see here there is a pop-up. This is if you're not on Plus. And then we've got this get it free, which we used earlier, and it's great. But for now, we're just going to focus on the pop-up. Ignore the delivery fees. They are a little bit, it's cheaper to sign up now. Cool. So our hypothesis was that removing these pop-ups will provide insight on how valuable they are in increasing Plus subscriptions. So this was it's a bit confusing, because what we actually did was we had these pop-ups, we removed them to verify how useful they were. So do you think that when we remove the pop-ups, we increased or decreased our Plus subscriptions? If you think that removing them increased subscriptions, put your hand up. Couple. Okay. If you think they decreased subscription rates, quite a few. If you think nothing happened, quite a few people. Okay. So Plus subscriptions did decrease when we removed the pop-up, and they decreased a lot. So, what is the lesson here for us developers? Well, challenge your assumptions. Pop-up and dialogues can be very useful from a business perspective. That is why we have them. And, you know, it's something I think is very good to remind yourself of all the time, because when we're sat in these meetings, we're planning new features, or we're doing scraping meetings, and someone suggests a pop-up, I have a tendency to be like, oh, are you sure you want this? But, you know, they are very, very powerful. And that's why we use them. And also it's super important just to make sure that you actually verify your pop-ups with an experiment, because they could be quite intrusive to the user. So make sure that they do actually bring value. Okay, there we go. So, time for takeaways. So why do we think that you should run A/B tests? Well, first of all, is to evaluate the value of the features that are rolled out. And we find as devs that it's so motivating, as kind of Jamie mentioned as well, to know how much impact the stuff that you're working on is having. So I always think that it's really nice when you work on stuff and you know that it's going to be an experiment, because you're so intrigued by the insights and you just think, oh, I'll actually get to see the real value of what I'm working on. Also, even if an experiment is flat, learnings from one experiment always informs the next one. You know, it can be, you always get a load of data and information about your customers that can always, you know, if you try and influence a metric and it doesn't have the desired result, you often think, okay, well, we'll use this information to try another way to iterate and try and influence this metric. It's also data-driven decision-making. You're not just shipping stuff and changing things and having no idea whether it's actually going to have a positive impact or not. And when we say that, you know, we do look at, obviously, tracking and other analytics events, but I think just that apples-to-apples comparison can be so important, because Ed kind of mentioned that as well. You know, we always have so many other external things that sort of influence whether something, you know, a metric goes up or down. So it's very hard, unless you run an experiment, to know that it's exactly what you've been working on. Cool, and just some best practices on running experiments. So obviously, decide on your metrics before you run the experiment. Decide what you're trying to influence, what you're looking for, or what you're trying to verify. And also power analysis is important to look at. So this is just thinking about how long will you need to run that experiment in order to get a result that is statistically significant. So this will depend a lot on like where in the app it is, where in the user journey, how many people see that screen, and so on. More effort does not always equal better results. So we've kind of shown whole features today, but we've also shown, you know, a color change on a button. If you want to start experimenting in your app, like start with something small. Just building a whole feature is not always going to bring the biggest result. Also, it's important to avoid overlapping interaction between experiments. And this is something that we work with quite a lot at Deliveroo. It's just thinking about, you know, if we have this experiment, this needs to run for that long, we might not want to make a certain change until the experiment has finished, and so on. Luckily, we have great data scientists who make sure that they can kind of isolate a lot of experiments and so on from other experiments that influence them as well. And finally, clean up after experiments finishes, because otherwise you'll have all these feature flags in your app and you don't really know like what's out in production, what's being run at the moment, and so on. So I think we just, need to be really good as devs to kind of think about cleaning up our feature flags and making sure that we clean up all the code as well if we're not actually going to roll out an experiment to all our users. Okay, I'm going to hand back over to Jamie to finish up.
Hey again. So just at the end here, a quick plug for Determinator. This is our open source library. Not really for us Android devs, but pass it on to your backend devs. If you're looking for a tool to run your experiments in, it might be useful for you. So this helps with stuff like if you've got isolated different backend systems, but you need to have the same outcomes. So one system needs to say, hey, is this feature enabled? Another system needs to ask the same question. Determinator will guarantee that you get the same value back in both systems. And also with stuff like when you're increasing or decreasing, I should say, your rollout fractions, you don't want to roll something to 40%, then bump it to 60%, and then get a different 60% to your initial 40%. So Determinator will make sure that it's the same users. So yeah, it's available. If you want to go check it out, pass it on to your backend devs. But it is important to know that other tools are available. Stuff like Firebase will, if you're just getting started with A/B tests and experiments, you know, Firebase has got some great tools available to help you out. Great. Thank you, everyone. Open the floor for questions, but a quick plug from our recruiting team that we are hiring. And if you're interested at all, go to careers.deliveroo.co.uk. Thank you.
Have you ever thought about experiment dark patterns? So if an experiment has a positive effect on revenue, but has a negative effect on user experience, What do you think?
Yeah. So we talk a lot in these slides about, we kind of isolate down to did people order more food or less food. Actually, in our metrics, we look at a lot of things. So sometimes you get an experiment back that it's an easy decision to make, like everything went up. Sometimes you get this mixed stuff and it becomes a bit of a judgment call. But it's very, very important, I think, to make sure that you're measuring a lot and you've got a lot of metrics back, so you have you can make a fully informed decision. Because you're totally right, you can get some weird mixed effects where some stuff goes up, some stuff goes down.
This is very simplified, isn't it?
Yeah, we're explicitly told not to give many numbers.
Do you ever run the same test multiple times?
You shouldn't. If you've got a statistically significant result in you run an experiment once, then it probably should be taken. I will concede that we ran the preloading one twice. It came back flat the first time. We ran it again for longer the second time, and it came back positive. So no, you shouldn't, but sometimes you will.
Why shouldn't you?
Once you have a stat significant result, I think that should be enough to decide. I think Archer data scientists will probably be the answer that question. They'll be able to a much better answer than me on why you shouldn't do that. But yeah, data science.
Anyone else?
Obviously, you've got a lot of people at Deliveroo. What's the sort of effort that goes into it? And do you think that this is enabled because you're at scale, or if you had a few people, would you be able to get the same results?
Yeah, I think the key here is that we have a lot of data scientists. I think that's the one big tip we've missed out here, is that if you haven't got data scientists, you should be hiring data scientists. They're invaluable in dissecting results and all that power analysis stuff. Actually running that experiment, they're going to be absolutely invaluable. But from an Android dev side, it's not a huge amount extra. You've got to manage some extra feature flags, and you've got some extra overhead to think about, but it's not too bad. We also have a load of internal tooling that helps us, but yeah, again, stuff like Firebase is really good, and we'll be able to help you without a load of internal tooling. But yeah, you're going to need some data scientists, unfortunately.
Do you use any fake door testing, or do you always try and build out the full feature?
You say that again?
Do you use any fake door testing? So in the case of that plus screen, rather than actually building the full switching from gold to silver, you could just have a button that says switch and then track the users that click on that, rather than building the full feature.
No, I don't think we do. It'd be a bit. I'd be aware of the negative impact of someone's frustration, of someone clicking on a button doesn't do anything. But yeah. Yeah, user testing maybe.
One last question.
Sure.
One.
I saw that in your application you don't have the switch between dark theme and light mode. Is because you run a test about it, or?
No, we're just really slow.
Okay.
It's coming. Maybe.